Today, we will talk about Ex-Works, EXW, defined, pros and cons, plus more Incoterms. Ex-Works is an international trade term that describes when a seller makes a product available at a designated location, and the buyer of the product must cover the transport costs. Ex-Works, EXW, is one of the 11 current Incoterms, international commercial terms, a set of standardized international trade terms published by the International Chamber of Commerce. Ex-Works requires a seller to safely package goods, label them appropriately, and deliver them to a previously agreed-upon location, such as the seller's nearest port. The seller must also help the buyer get export licenses or other required paperwork, although the buyer must pay the actual fees for the documents. Once the buyer has the goods, it is up to the buyer to cover any expenses and account for any risks that pertain to the goods. Ex-Works costs are calculated by businesses that want to cut costs by removing the so-called seller's value added for shipping. For example, suppose Company A has priced a pair of printers from Company B at $4,000, with an Ex-Works shipping cost of $200. To save money, Company A finds a third-party shipper to deliver the printers for $170. So to save the $30 on shipping, they make an Ex-Works deal with Company B. An Ex-Works agreement differs from a free on-board agreement, in which the seller covers the cost of getting its goods to a shipping terminal and pays all the customs costs to get them on board. Ex-Works is the obligation on the buyer's part to incur the costs of loading goods for transport. Free on board is the term used to refer to the seller's obligation to load goods. Generally, FOB transfers ownership of goods to the buyer once they are loaded on the buyer's transportation method. However, there is a possibility that the seller might remain responsible for them during transport to the final destination. This depends on the contract and the terms the buyer and seller have agreed on. Under EXW, the buyer assumes most of the responsibilities once they collect the purchased goods from the seller. Sellers in an EXW agreement, in contrast to buyers, have very few responsibilities. Generally, they are responsible for packing the goods to be loaded and transported and providing a place for the buyer to pick them up. Ex-Works, free on board, and free carrier are all part of the International Chamber of Commerce's Incoterms. They are used in international trade contracts to outline matters, including the time and place of delivery and payment, when the risk of loss shifts from the seller to the buyer, and the party responsible for paying the freight and insurance costs. The Incoterms were first established in 1936, and the current version, Incoterms 2020, has 11 terms. Ex-Works is a term used in shipping arrangements where the seller is only required to deliver goods at a predetermined location, and the buyer bears responsibility for shipping costs. Along with these costs, the buyer assumes responsibility for the related risks of the goods, which may include anything from customs regulations to loading and transferring to other ships. Ex-Works falls under the Incoterms, a standard framework of 11 terms designed to clarify various trade contracts. With an Ex-Works agreement, the seller saves on shipping, customs, and liability for damaged goods after being delivered, packaged, and labeled at the shipping terminal. While this may be optimal sometimes for sellers, it is not always possible due to customs requirements in certain jurisdictions. Take the European Union, for example, which restricts non-resident corporations from completing export declaration forms. In this case, an Ex-Works contract would be detrimental to both the seller and the buyer. In contrast, a free carrier contract that bears shipping responsibility on the seller could offer a more suitable alternative. Ex-Works is an international trading agreement that spells out the responsibilities of the buyer and seller. Under an EXW agreement, the buyer accepts all responsibilities and costs of picking up and transporting goods to their desired destination. Under specific circumstances, an EXW agreement is less expensive than the FOB alternative, but the buyer must be prepared for and know the costs of transporting goods to the place they want them. The best instances for using an EXW are when the seller cannot export goods or when the buyer intends to consolidate purchases to reduce costs. Here are 3 key takeaways. 1. Ex Works, EXW, is a shipping arrangement in which a seller makes a product available at a specific location, but the buyer has to pay the transport costs. 2. Once buyers have their goods, they are responsible for other risks, such as loading them onto trucks, transferring them to a ship or plane, and meeting customs regulations. 3. Ex Works is an Incoterms, International Commercial Terms, one of 11 standardized international trade terms published by the International Chamber of Commerce. Hope this would help. Thanks for watching.